Lieutenant James Whitmore was not supposed to photograph the harbor at Saint-Nazaire on June 14, 1942. His mission assignment was specific and limited: photograph German defensive positions along the French coast, map the gun placements, document any changes to fortifications since the previous reconnaissance pass 3 weeks earlier. The coordinates were marked on his map. The time window was marked on his flight plan. The altitude was specified, 8,000 feet. The camera settings were predetermined. Everything was controlled. Everything was planned. Everything was supposed to follow the established protocol that had been developed over months of tactical reconnaissance operations in the European theater. But protocols were restrictions, and James Whitmore had always been someone who chafed against restrictions. He was 31 years old, a former commercial pilot before the war, someone who understood aircraft not as military machines, but as extensions of his own body, instruments through which he could perceive the world in ways that ordinary men could not. Flying a stripped-down F-4 Lightning, a twin-boomed reconnaissance variant with weapons removed and cameras fitted where guns had been, gave him a freedom that most soldiers never experienced. He was alone in the aircraft. He was responsible only to the mission parameters. And he was, within certain bounds, free to exercise his own judgment about how to accomplish those parameters. As he approached Saint-Nazaire after completing the primary reconnaissance task, James noticed something. The harbor appeared different from previous photographs, not in ways that were dramatic or obvious, but in ways that suggested movement, reorganization, something happening. German ships that had previously been berthed in specific locations had moved or disappeared. New defensive positions appeared to have been constructed, and there was something else: activity in a section of the harbor that had previously appeared to be purely defensive infrastructure. But now there appeared to be construction work, cranes, materials, movement that suggested something new was being built. The mission parameters said nothing about this area. The area was not on his assigned reconnaissance targets. The coordinates did not include this section of the harbor. James's orders were clear: photograph the assigned targets and return to base. Do not deviate from the flight plan. Do not attempt to gather additional intelligence. The reconnaissance operations were carefully choreographed with other military activities. Deviations from assigned parameters created confusion in the intelligence analysis process. Intelligence officers depended on knowing exactly what areas had been photographed and when, so they could integrate the new information with existing intelligence and build accurate pictures of German defensive dispositions. And yet James made a decision that technically violated his orders. He altered his flight path slightly. He descended to 6,000 feet, lower than his assigned altitude, increasing his exposure to German anti-aircraft fire but improving the resolution of photographs he could take. He positioned his aircraft to approach the suspicious area of the harbor from a direction that would allow him to photograph both the new construction activity and the broader context of the harbor around it. And he opened the camera shutter, recording on film the image of whatever was happening in that small section of the harbor that had not been on his assignment sheet, and that he was not technically authorized to photograph. The entire deviation lasted perhaps 90 seconds. Then James corrected his course, climbed back to his assigned altitude, and turned toward home. The photographs had been taken. The film was in the camera, secured in a magazine, waiting to be developed when the aircraft returned to base. James knew that the unauthorized photographs might cause problems. Mission recordings were tracked carefully. The camera settings were logged. The film would be reviewed, and it would be obvious that the camera had been used at an altitude and during a time frame that did not correspond to the assigned mission parameters. There would be questions. There might be disciplinary action. But James also understood that whatever he had photographed in that 90-second deviation might be significant. The activity in that harbor section had seemed deliberate. It had seemed planned. It had seemed to indicate that something important was being constructed or organized. James returned to base without incident. The aircraft landed safely. The film was removed and taken to the photo laboratory for development and analysis. And then, as predicted, questions began to emerge. The photo interpreters noticed the unauthorized photographs. Questions were asked. James was brought in and asked to explain why he had deviated from his assigned mission parameters. He explained what he had observed: the apparent construction activity, the reorganization of the harbor, his intuition that something significant was being built. The intelligence officers were not pleased. Deviations from protocol created problems. It meant that the photographs could not be easily integrated into the broader intelligence analysis. It meant that comparison with previous missions became more difficult because the angles and altitudes were different. It meant that the unauthorized photographs existed outside the normal intelligence workflow. There was discussion of disciplinary action. There was discussion of whether the photographs should even be retained or should be destroyed as contaminated intelligence data. But there was also a growing curiosity about what James had actually photographed. The film quality was good, the resolution was clear, and the subject matter, the construction activity in the harbor, was genuinely visible and apparently significant. The photographs were brought to the attention of the senior photo interpreter at the Intelligence Analysis Center, a man named Dr. Edward Cross, who had spent decades studying German military installations before the war, and who had become the leading expert in interpreting German defensive and military construction. Cross was in his 50s, with the meticulous attention to detail that characterized expert photo interpreters. He could look at an aerial photograph and see not just what was physically present, but what was implied by the arrangement of structures and materials. He could infer intention from layout. He could deduce purpose from the positioning of equipment. Cross examined Whitmore's unauthorized photographs with a level of intensity that suggested he understood their significance. He called in colleagues. He requested access to previous photographs of the same harbor section. He began to construct a timeline of changes, comparing images from reconnaissance missions conducted over preceding weeks and months. What emerged from this analysis was a picture of deliberate, sustained construction activity that had been obscured by the normal intelligence collection patterns. The area that Whitmore had photographed appeared to be a staging area for something. Cranes indicated material handling capability. The presence of workers, visible as small figures in the high-resolution photographs, indicated ongoing construction. But construction of what? The structures that were visible did not match any known German defensive installations or military hardware. The layout suggested something else entirely. Cross and his team began to form a hypothesis. The structures appeared to be designed to hold something large, something that required specific positioning and specific support infrastructure. Cross requested access to intercepted German communications. He requested access to prisoner interrogation reports. He requested intelligence from other sources about German military activities and German strategic thinking. What emerged from this broader intelligence synthesis was a startling possibility. The construction in the Saint-Nazaire harbor section appeared to be a staging area for German invasion preparations. Specifically, it appeared to be infrastructure designed to stage and organize flat-bottomed invasion craft, barges designed to carry troops and equipment across the English Channel. If this hypothesis was correct, it suggested something profound. The Germans had not abandoned the possibility of invading Britain. The conventional wisdom among military intelligence analysts was that the German invasion threat had passed, that the Germans had shifted their strategic focus eastward toward the Soviet Union, that the threat of invasion had receded to the point where it was no longer a primary intelligence concern. But these photographs, unauthorized photographs taken by a pilot who had deviated from his assigned mission, suggested otherwise. They suggested that German military planning still included the possibility of an invasion of Britain, even if that possibility was not being actively pursued in the immediate term. The intelligence analysis that emerged from Cross's work was circulated through the British and American intelligence establishments. It reached high-level strategic planners. It reached the commanders responsible for home defense. And it contributed to a reassessment of the strategic situation. Resources that had been allocated to offensive operations were partially redirected toward defensive preparations. Contingency plans that had been shelved were dusted off and reviewed. The assessment that Germany maintained the capability and the intention to invade Britain, even if the timing was uncertain, influenced military strategic thinking for months afterward. But the analysis also created controversy. Some intelligence officials argued that Cross's interpretation was speculative, that the physical structures visible in the photographs could have had multiple possible explanations, that the assumption of invasion-related construction was not warranted by the evidence. They pointed out that Whitmore's photographs had been taken outside normal mission parameters and thus could not be fully trusted as reliable intelligence data. They argued for caution in drawing strategic conclusions from unauthorized photography. The debate within the intelligence community became heated. Intelligence officials took positions. Meetings were conducted. The question of whether Germany actually intended to invade Britain became a matter of significant strategic debate. Ultimately, the assessment that emerged was nuanced. Cross and his supporters argued that Germany maintained invasion capability and that the Saint-Nazaire construction suggested that the capability was being prepared for potential use. Skeptics acknowledged that the construction was real but questioned its significance. The result was a compromise assessment. Germany possessed the capability to invade Britain. Germany was conducting construction and preparation activities that were consistent with invasion staging. But there was no definitive intelligence indicating that invasion was imminent, or that Germany had committed to invasion as a near-term strategic objective. The assessment was forwarded up the chain of command with caveats and uncertainties. The controversy over the interpretation of Whitmore's photographs contributed to a broader recognition that photography from reconnaissance missions, even photographs taken outside assigned parameters, could contain significant strategic intelligence. It contributed to a shift in how reconnaissance photography was valued and analyzed. It contributed to a growing recognition that tactical reconnaissance pilots operating at the front edge of military intelligence sometimes possessed information and intuitions that could identify patterns that higher-level intelligence analysis might miss. Military intelligence does not function on single pieces of evidence. Military strategy does not shift on the basis of one photograph, even one that is dramatic and suggestive. The assessment that emerged from Whitmore's unauthorized photographs, that Germany was maintaining invasion capability and conducting preparation activities, was controversial precisely because it rested significantly on that single source. Intelligence officials demanded additional verification. They demanded more photographs of the Saint-Nazaire harbor area. They demanded different angles and different time points to establish whether the construction activity was ongoing or whether it had been a one-time event. Additional reconnaissance missions were tasked specifically to photograph the Saint-Nazaire harbor construction activity. The missions were authorized at higher levels of command because they addressed a question of strategic importance. Pilots flying these authorized missions were given precise instructions to photograph the specific area that Whitmore had identified. The photographs that were obtained confirmed the essential elements of Whitmore's initial observations. The construction activity was real. The staging infrastructure was present. The activity appeared to be ongoing. But the additional photographs also provided new information. The construction appeared to be incomplete. The barges themselves were not yet present in the harbor. The infrastructure appeared to be in early stages of development, rather than in late stages of preparation. This suggested that if invasion preparations were indeed underway, they were not at an advanced stage. The threat timeline, if a threat existed, was not immediate, but rather something that might materialize weeks or months in the future. Cross and his team used the additional photographs to refine their interpretation. The initial hypothesis of active invasion preparation shifted to a more cautious interpretation. Germany was maintaining the capability to conduct invasion operations and was conducting low-level preparation activities to keep that capability functional. But Germany was not conducting the kind of intensive, visible preparation that would characterize an imminent invasion. The assessment shifted from invasion is being prepared to invasion capability is being maintained. This more refined assessment was circulated through the intelligence communities. It had different implications than the initial, more alarmist interpretation. It suggested that defensive preparations should be maintained, but that immediate alertness to invasion threat could be somewhat reduced. It suggested that the Germans might be maintaining invasion capability as a contingency or as a deception measure. But that invasion was not the primary focus of German strategic planning. The German strategic focus appeared to be concentrated on the conflict with the Soviet Union, which had begun in June 1942. The invasion of Britain appeared to be a secondary or tertiary strategic concern, if it was a concern at all. The interpretation evolved further as months passed and as additional photography was obtained. The construction activity at Saint-Nazaire appeared to have been completed or had been suspended. The staging infrastructure was not being actively maintained. No new barges appeared in the harbor. No evidence emerged of preparation for actual invasion operations. The intelligence assessment gradually shifted from viewing invasion as a maintained capability to viewing it as something that Germany had effectively abandoned as a strategic objective, even if the physical capability to conduct invasion remained theoretically present. Whitmore's unauthorized photograph, which had initially seemed to reveal a dramatic hidden German strategy, the maintenance of invasion capability, and the preparation for potential invasion of Britain, gradually resolved into a more complex and more subtle picture. What appeared to be evidence of active invasion preparation was actually evidence of infrastructure that Germany was maintaining but not actively using. What appeared to be a hidden strategy was actually evidence of contingency preparations that Germany was conducting but was not prioritizing. The question of what Whitmore's unauthorized photographs actually revealed remained contested throughout the remainder of 1942 and into 1943. Intelligence officials debated whether the photographs had exposed a significant hidden German strategy or whether Whitmore had simply photographed maintenance activities that had no strategic significance whatsoever. The debate reflected broader tensions within the intelligence community about how to interpret photographic evidence, about how much weight to place on individual pieces of intelligence, about how to guard against both complacency and alarmism. Some officials argued that Whitmore's deviation from mission parameters had been justified by the significance of what he had photographed. They argued that his intuition and his willingness to deviate from restrictive protocols had resulted in intelligence photographs that revealed important aspects of German military planning. They argued that the flexibility to deviate from strict protocols, when justified by circumstances, was valuable for intelligence operations. They argued that the intelligence gained from Whitmore's photographs was worth the protocol violation. Other officials argued that Whitmore's deviation had been unjustified and should be punished. They argued that military operations depended on adherence to protocol and that allowing individual pilots to make independent decisions about what to photograph would create chaos in intelligence operations. They argued that the photographs Whitmore had obtained were of dubious intelligence value because they had not been obtained under controlled conditions and thus could not be reliably integrated into the broader intelligence picture. They argued that the protocol violations were more significant than any intelligence value the photographs might have provided. The debate about Whitmore himself was ultimately decided in his favor. Despite his protocol violation, despite the unauthorized nature of his photographs, Whitmore was not disciplined. Instead, he was quietly commended for his attention and for his willingness to deviate from mission parameters when circumstances seemed to warrant it. He was allowed to continue flying reconnaissance missions. In fact, he was given somewhat more latitude in his future missions to exercise his judgment about when deviation from assigned parameters might be justified by observed circumstances. But the larger strategic implications of the photographs remained uncertain. Did they reveal a significant German strategy? Did they demonstrate that Germany was maintaining invasion capability? Or were they simply photographs of infrastructure that was being maintained for other purposes, or for contingency planning that Germany had no serious intention of pursuing? The interpretations differed based on the assumptions that analysts brought to the photographs. Those who were already concerned about German invasion threat used the photographs to support their concern. Those who were skeptical of the invasion threat used the same photographs to support their skepticism. By the end of 1942, the question became somewhat moot. Germany's strategic focus had shifted decisively eastward toward the Soviet Union. The invasion of Britain became, for practical purposes, irrelevant as a German strategic objective. The infrastructure at Saint-Nazaire was gradually dismantled. New construction did not occur. The question of whether Germany had been seriously preparing to invade Britain remained unresolved and became increasingly academic as the war progressed and as the balance of power shifted decisively against Germany. But within intelligence circles, the incident of Whitmore's unauthorized photographs had contributed to important conversations about intelligence methodology, about the value of individual initiative, versus the necessity of protocol adherence, about the challenges of interpreting photographic evidence when multiple interpretations were possible. The incident became a case study in intelligence training programs. It was discussed in lectures about photo interpretation. It was cited in debates about how intelligence organizations should balance the need for protocols with the need for flexibility. James Whitmore continued flying reconnaissance missions for the remainder of 1942 and into 1943. He flew over France. He flew over Germany. He flew at high altitude and low altitude, photographing German defensive installations, German military movements, German industrial facilities. His photographs contributed to the broader intelligence picture that guided American military operations. Some of his photographs revealed significant military information. Some of his photographs revealed nothing of importance. And through it all, Whitmore maintained the same attitude that had characterized his initial unauthorized mission, a willingness to exercise his judgment, to make independent decisions about what to photograph, to deviate from strict protocols when circumstances seemed to warrant it. In early 1944, Whitmore was shot down over France. His F-4 Lightning was hit by anti-aircraft fire. He bailed out and was captured by German forces. He spent the remainder of the war as a prisoner of war. He survived the war and was repatriated in 1945. He was discharged from military service shortly thereafter and returned to civilian life. He never achieved significant fame or recognition for his wartime service. The photographs he had obtained were classified for decades. The controversies about their interpretation were forgotten as the war progressed and new, more pressing strategic questions emerged. By the time Whitmore's reconnaissance work was eventually declassified and became available to historians, the events of 1942 had receded into the distant past. The question of whether Germany had been seriously planning to invade Britain was no longer a matter of strategic significance. The photographs that Whitmore had obtained, authorized and unauthorized, were studied by researchers interested in World War II intelligence history, but they were no longer matters of active debate or strategic importance. But within the intelligence profession, the broader lessons of Whitmore's unauthorized photographs persisted. The incident had demonstrated that reconnaissance pilots operating in the field, possessing immediate knowledge of what was being photographed, sometimes possessed intuitions and insights that analysts working in distant intelligence centers might not possess. It had demonstrated that deviation from protocol could sometimes produce intelligence value that exceeded the cost of protocol violation. It had demonstrated that the relationship between individual initiative and organizational protocol was complex and could not be resolved through simple adherence to hierarchical rules. The experience of reconnaissance operations in World War II contributed to a growing recognition that intelligence gathering depended not just on equipment and not just on established protocols, but also on the judgment and intuition of the individuals conducting the intelligence gathering operations. This recognition influenced how military intelligence organizations were structured in the decades after the war. It influenced how discretion was allocated within intelligence hierarchies. It influenced how much freedom was given to field operators to make independent decisions about what information to collect. Whitmore died in 1978 at the age of 67. His death went largely unnoticed. A small obituary appeared in a local newspaper in the town where he had lived in retirement. It mentioned his wartime service as a pilot, but did not detail the significance of his reconnaissance work. Few people, reading that obituary, would have understood that the man they were reading about had been involved in intelligence operations that had contributed to strategic assessments about German invasion capability, that his unauthorized photographs had sparked significant debates within military intelligence, that his willingness to deviate from strict protocols had influenced how military intelligence organizations thought about balancing protocol adherence with individual initiative. But in the classified archives that held records of military intelligence operations, Whitmore's name appeared in connection with photographs that had been controversial and significant. In the training programs that military intelligence organizations conducted for new generations of intelligence professionals, the case of Whitmore's unauthorized photographs at Saint-Nazaire was sometimes cited as an example of how individual initiative could produce value in intelligence operations. In the manuals that discussed intelligence collection procedures, the balance between protocol and flexibility was sometimes illustrated through the example of reconnaissance operations in World War II. The inheritance of Whitmore's work was not a specific doctrine or a specific set of techniques. The inheritance was a recognition that intelligence gathering was not purely a technical or mechanical process, but rather a process that depended on human judgment, human intuition, and human willingness to sometimes deviate from established procedures when circumstances seemed to warrant such deviation. This recognition has persisted in military intelligence organizations throughout the decades since World War II, influencing how intelligence operations are conducted and how discretion is allocated to field operatives. And though Whitmore himself is largely forgotten, the principles that his work exemplified, the necessity of balancing protocol with flexibility, the value of individual judgment in intelligence gathering, the importance of paying attention to what might initially seem irrelevant, continue to influence military intelligence operations in ways that would be difficult to trace back to their origins in a reconnaissance pilot's unauthorized photographs taken over a French harbor in June 1942.